here. All right. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's Professor Joel Hunter here with Philosophy 135, Truckee Meadows Community College. We are in week 5. We are doing social contractarianism this week. You're in the right place if you are looking for some help on getting through these readings and then looking back at your quiz performance to see the areas that you can improve. So let's get started today. I want to just make sure that we have an opportunity for everybody to tune in who can tune in. And I'm just going to pop over and make sure that I've got my settings up. Okay, looks like we have sound, looks like we have video. So let's get started. And I want to get started by talking about your last quiz. So it was a different kind of quiz because you had 40 questions on it instead of the typical 20. And you had also 4 chapters worth of reading. So there's 2 normative theories. You had the consequentialist theory and you had the Kantian theory. And that was, in my opinion, those are 2 of the hardest theories to digest because there's a lot of vocabulary that's unique to those theories that you have to understand, and the arguments supporting them are require a fair amount of detail, and they have to be adjusted to objections that are raised. And so one thing you saw, for example, in the Kantian chapters is that the author he broke form. He presented you the Kantian theory without the advantages chapter leading and then the disadvantages chapter coming after. Instead, what he did is he identified 4 themes that run throughout Kantian ethics, and he broke up the 2 chapters and covered 2 of those themes. So all of the objections or disadvantages of the Kantian theory were woven into those chapters. That was structurally, that was a little bit harder to work through. So I can appreciate some of the difficulty that you had on that, certainly on that section alone. And then the other difficulty that I think I was noticing in some of the performance on the consequentialism questions, which were questions 1 through 20, was that because this was combined over 2 weeks, that was the older week. That was the first week. And I'm thinking that some of your review of the consequentialist chapters were not as fresh, to put it in those terms. I think that because we all tend to read in order, you know, if you're given chapters 9 through 12 to read, you're going to start with 9, and then by the end of the time, you're going to finish with chapter 12. So that last chapter or last chapters are going to be fresher in your memory than the previous chapters, and it's easier to confuse them and make mistakes that way. So I think those were a couple factors going on. In spite of that, the overall average was 80%. Again, that is pretty darn impressive, given that it was a more difficult quiz because of the quantity of the questions and of just simply the difficulty of the theories that you were expected to understand. So 80% as a quiz average on that quiz is really quite good. So, I mean, you should pat yourselves on the back, I mean, as a class, right? So, you know, when I look at the statistics, of course, there's always, you know, a distribution, right? There are low scores, there are higher scores. The thing that I'm seeing is that the lower scores are easier to separate from the middle of the pack and higher scores. In other words, there's broader separation between the lowest scores, and then there's a big gap, and then you get the middle and higher scores. So what that tells me is that there's a certain group of students, if I put a number on it, it'd probably be like 3 to 5 per week, that just don't seem to be engaged in the class. So you're taking the quizzes because you have to for the grade, but it appears to me that you're not really putting in the level of work and effort that you need to succeed. And that's what I've talked a lot about in the earliest videos and in the earliest announcements, the additional materials I've presented to you to encourage you to do close reading, take notes, and those kinds of things. So I care about all the students, and I want to know if there's something else going on with the 3 to 5 students who are not really anywhere close to that average. I want to see you be able to improve your grade. And if it's just a matter of you're just not doing the work well, you know what you got to do, right? But if there's something else going on, then I want to know about it. For the remainder of the students, again, it looks like that many of you are taking my instruction to heart and working through very, very difficult subject matter, and you're answering not easy quiz questions, and you're doing it at a fairly high level. So that's really good. That's very encouraging to me. And so I'm looking at how I feel about it, but how you may feel about it may be a little different, because maybe your personal performance just isn't up to where you think you would be or should be. And so I've talked with a couple of you by email about that, and made some suggestions. If more of you feel that way, maybe are kind of surprised that you're not doing better, then I really encourage you to reach out. Let's connect about that, and let's see if we can pinpoint some things maybe that you aren't including into your preparation that you could include, and then other things that maybe I can identify for you personally. So I'm happy to do that, as I have with a couple other students already. And let's see if we can continue to get everybody to improve in the class. So yeah, I just wanted to say that by way of introduction, that I've overall just so impressed with the performance on that last quiz. By far the hardest material that we've had, and probably will have. Right. So let's get to the slide deck, and want to get through our material for today. I'm going to try to keep this one a lot briefer for the last one. I think, what was the last, like, over an hour? Okay, that's a lot of commitment for you to have to review a video. So I'm going to try to keep this briefer. So if anyone has questions, let's go ahead and get those questions. I can queue them up in the Q&A over here. So you can, if you're viewing and you want to pose a question anytime, you can always type it in to the question and answer. And we should have audio. So for those of you tuned in, I can make sure that, yeah. So what I found out that there's a threshold number of viewers that it takes to enable the audio on the viewers' ends. So if we get, I think it's 3 or more, then we'll be able to have the audio interaction if you want to do that. But I just encourage you, even if until we do have that you go ahead and make use of the question and answer, and type something in as it occurs to you, and I can come back after going through a few slides, and I can check those and answer your questions. So, all right, cool beans. Let's go ahead and talk about the stuff for today. All right. Sharing. Okay, that's not what I wanted to do. What am I doing? All right, let's try that again. Stop. Here we go. Try that again. I don't know what I did wrong. All right, let's share this. Yes. Here we are. All right, so let's talk about the stuff for this week, which is social contractarianism, and it's chapters 13 and 14, as well as the autopsy. We're going to do, of course, an autopsy on your previous quiz, point out a couple things that I found going on there. Again, hopefully always trying to point out questions that show me something maybe that I can help you identify as a problem that you could repeat, but that you won't repeat if we can identify that. Okay, so quiz 4, autopsy. Then we're going to go into the material for this week, the reading that you've been working on so far this week, and then the Q&A. All right. So first one that I wanted to talk about from quiz 4 is in the I think most of these are consequentialist questions because as a general rule, you perform better on the Kantian section. That was questions 21 through 40. So let's start with the very first question, which kind of surprised me because the answers for this one, it was a multiple answer, were available to you in the reading. So consequentialist theory asserts that blank, and here you are asked to select all that apply, and the answers are to be found fairly close to each other. The first one is actually the second answer choice is if multiple actions are open to you, choose the one that is optimific. That's page 120, near the very beginning of the reading. And then the second correct answer, all of you got actually, that an act is morally required if it produces the best overall results. So that's really another way of saying optimific, but that's on page 121. That particular phrasing is 121. And there is talking about what is morally required and forbidden. Okay, so looking at the other answer choices, so a handful of you chose the central moral virtues integrity. No, that's Kant. And then it's wrong to violate someone's rights. Really, consequentialism and the notion of rights don't play well together. You don't really get a good concept of rights, individual rights, until you get to Kant and certainly contractarianism. So those were wrong. So there we have four students who chose what I would consider to be obviously wrong answers. So there's why I was saying earlier in the introduction that there seems to be a small number, a small minority of students who simply are not engaging in the close reading. So just want to encourage you guys to not miss these easier ones. I would consider this one of the easier questions. Okay, next is question 3. A consequentialist approach to criminal justice requires that we punish only those criminals who deserve to be punished. And this was an interesting one. More of you missed this than got it correct. And I was curious about that because here is one of those questions that even though the answer is explicitly in the text, I made this question because it is exactly one of those things that runs against our own typical intuitions, moral intuitions. We have a moral intuition, the majority of us have a moral intuition that when we punish criminals, we have to be very careful about only punishing criminals who actually deserve it. We can't just randomly pick people out of society and make them examples. We have that intuition. Now, as we see in consequentialism, that ain't necessarily so under a consequentialist theory. So your answer, like I said, was explicitly in your text. It's page 149, and there's actually some discussion of that. And this idea of deserving punishment or that we get rewarded or punished for our behaviors, that speaks to the intuition we have about justice, and that justice is central to our moral framework. But that is not central to the moral framework of consequentialism. And in fact, it's the primary problem of consequentialism, or at least the consequentialists often have to address and figure out how to overcome that objection. So anyway, if you look on pages 149 and following, you're going to see this discussion that no, in fact, we punish. Okay, maybe there's another key word here. It's that word only. We punish only those criminals who deserve to be punished. So that's exclusive, right? That means that those who do not deserve to be punished should never be punished. But that's exactly what consequentialism denies. And it's there in the concepts of vicarious punishment and exemplary punishment, which consequentialism allows. And that's, again, that discussion is on page 149. Okay, so I guess the takeaway point of this is that when you come across a question in the quiz that really resonates with how you personally think the moral fabric of the universe should be or is, that's exactly when you should be careful. Stick to what the subject matter actually is. And in this case, it's what consequentialism says, and not, and those, I love those questions where a particular normative theory is going to just be fingers on the chalkboard when it comes to what they actually assert, what they say is morally required or morally forbidden, that just runs up against the sort of basic moral starting points that a lot of us share. So I think you've seen that pattern now in the quizzes that I've given you. I love those kinds of questions. Even if they're explicitly answered in the text, I think this is why that many of you missed this question. So part of it is a careful reading of the question. Part of it is knowing that you are being asked about that particular moral theory and what it says, and not sort of filling in the blanks, at least in your understanding of the theory, with what your own moral positions are. So just be careful of that. Okay. Heavy sigh. Questions 8 through 9. These are the ones that I actually spent a fair amount of time going over in the previous hangout we did, alerting you to these specific questions. I can't remember if I gave you the explicit questions. I'm pretty sure I gave you almost the exact wording, but I told you that these questions, they're on the quiz, and they are trap questions. And I tried to help you out by using those exclusionary terms like only, and always. Those were hints as well, but they are explicitly raised on pages 122 and 123 and denied by the author. So again, look at those questions again, and just take this. Here's the takeaway lesson for this. So 5 to 7 of you missed these questions. What that tells me is that you all, that group of people, A, you didn't read the text closely enough, and B, you did not go over, you did not review the replay of our previous hangout. And because there I gave you these answers, and I warned you quite a lot that they were coming. And here is the sort of confirmation that my theory is correct. Is I go and I look at the number of views that the replays have had, and you know what it was? It was 15. So that doesn't mean that every single person who answered question 9 correctly watched the video, but I don't think that that's an accident, that the number of people who got that question right is exactly the number of people who had watched the replay of the previous video when I gave you the answers to these questions. So again, the takeaway is, please use all the resources that I'm giving you, including these videos, because when I've given quizzes on this material in the past, this issue comes up again and again. The issue here is that we tend to want to oversimplify a theory, especially difficult theories or complicated theories. We want to oversimplify them, and that's what your author addresses, is that there are 2 common mistakes people make when they oversimplify what utilitarianism says. And so that's why I thought it was important to have those. Okay, next, question 11. Which of the following statements is not consistent with the utilitarian view of how to judge the morality of intentions? Okay, so this was another topic that I raised in your previous hangout, and it is the sort of difficult, how to put this? It is, so there are moral interests that we have both in actions and in intentions. I think, just about everybody would understand and agree with that. However, consequentialism and utilitarianism do not do not collapse those into one moral or one standard of moral judgment. Instead, consequentialism always, or utilitarianism always, gives priority to the one's actions, and intentions are secondary. So there are the material that is important for you to answer this question is on page 126. The discussion starts on the previous page, but it's the very last sentence where the statement that is correct, which is the second one: if you pass up a chance to do an action that would have had better results, you haven't done anything wrong. So notice, first of all, that that has to do with actions and not what you meant to do. And then the results have to have, the results will tell us whether it was a right or wrong action. And so here we're told that it would have had better results, but you passed up the action that would have had better results. So utilitarianism says that's always wrong. Always, always, always. And so that statement is not consistent with the utilitarian view of how to judge the morality of intentions. So if you look at page 126 in the last sentence, I'll just read it to you. When we pass up a chance to do an action that would have had better results, we are doing something wrong. Always. That's utilitarianism. So this one is one of those questions that's explicitly in the text. And it could be that some of those answer choices were you selected because, again, they aligned more with your own views about it. So anyway, this one, I circled the not, again, to point out that you're looking for the statement that utilitarians do not believe. And it's that second one. The rest of them are consistent with the utilitarian view of intentions and actions. Okay. Number next, we go on now to Kant. I've got 2 or 3 Kant questions. The following statement is consistent with Kant ethics. There's that word again, consistent. It is crucial that the morality of our actions depends entirely on what is within our control. So this one is true. That is very much part of the Kantian view. And the answer is on page 164. If you go there, this is stated explicitly right at the top of the page. So I would chalk this one up to just close reading, and because it stands out actually because the sentence that the author where the author says this kind of even highlights this point. So I'll just read that. It starts at the bottom, 163. Kant had a deep reason for making the morality of an action depend on its maxim rather than its results. It is crucial that the morality of our actions depends entirely on what is within our control. Okay, so the idea there is, is related to our autonomy, that we are able to choose those maxims, that is those principles that are going to govern our actions. Right. So this is just straight out of the text, and it's just surprised me that 35% of you didn't get this one. Okay, question 33. I say here, let me go back for a second. I say that because overall in the Kantian section of the quiz, that was questions 21 through 40, the performance was actually quite good. And that was very encouraging, because I think the Kantian theory in those 2 chapters is the hardest one in the whole course. So you all did overall really well, but so this was kind of an anomaly, and it stood out to me. Just wanted to bring it to your attention. Not sure if what was going on with that, given the superior performance really on the Kantian chapters. So anyway, that's why that one stood out to me. Question 33. Okay. Which of the following statements would Kant reject if you have moral reasons to do action A? And then this is a select all that apply. So what you're looking for then is the exception to the moral framework, where the Kantian moral framework, where there is some action that's under consideration and that you have moral reasons to do it. Okay, so you've gone through the process of universalizing the maxim, and you arrive at, okay, so I should not cheat on my taxes. I need to submit my tax forms and pay my taxes. So I have moral reasons to do that, to do action A. Now, which of the following statements would Kant reject, given that I have moral reasons to do that? Okay, so let's look at these answer choices here. The surprising thing to me was how many of you chose that first answer choice. The majority of you chose it, but it is actually the singular one that Kant rejects. Okay, and so the discussion of this, I'll give you credit here. This is not an easy question. This might be actually the hardest Kant question that I gave you on the quiz. The answer is spread out on 2 pages, pages 168 and 171, where actually each of these answer choices is raised and either accepted or not. So, if you're going to, you should do A even if it makes you more miserable than happy. Yes, that's definitely Kant, right? So would the ethical egoists accept that? No, probably not. But Kant does. Kant says that's, yes, you do A because you have more reasons to do A. So it doesn't matter if you're going to be miserable or more miserable than happy. You still got to do it. It's your moral duty at that point. So what about if there's bad consequences for yourself or others? What about the results of that action? Well, too bad. Again, that's what Kant would say, that if it brings some unhappiness to me, if it harms my own well-being, well, so much the worse for me and my well-being. If I have a moral duty to do A, then that's what I got to do. And of course, I gave you the example of paying taxes. You can work through that yourself. I mean, I don't know anybody who's particularly enthusiastic and happy and celebrating that they're writing checks to the IRS, but that's the difference between moral duty and the kind of values that we attach to doing our duties. Okay, next is, you ought to do A even if it is something that you do not want to do. So that gets to the question of desire. And throughout, especially chapter 11, the author went into a lot of discussion about Kant's aim is to detach moral judgment from desire. That got started with talking about the golden rule, and that any kind of desire-based justification for evaluating the morality of our actions is getting off on the wrong foot. So, and there's a discussion of why that is from Kant's perspective. So anyway, that one is certainly out as well. So Kant's rejecting those bottom 3, but that you ought to do A if it violates your moral duty. Well, what's your moral duty, right? And this is I think the important part of it is on page 171 to give you the answer to that, where there's the discussion of the moral duties as being absolute. So I think the key sentence there is in the middle of 171. In any conflict between moral duty and other demands, say those of the law, okay, paying your taxes, self-interest or tradition, morality wins. Still, it doesn't follow that moral duties are absolute, for even if they always outweigh other kinds of considerations, moral duties might conflict with other moral duties. And if they do, they can't all be absolute. Some of them must give way to others. And so Kant is, Kant's theory, although he doesn't spell this out, your author does. And here, this is relevant as well, that I may have a moral duty, given that I have moral reasons to do action A, but it might conflict with some more important moral duty, and I can't violate that. And so that again is why you can't just outright accept this as consistent with Kant. So this one has to be rejected. Again, look at those pages and you can fill out for yourself why the first answer choice is not consistent with Kant's view. Okay, went on about that for a while. Question 40, how does one find out what one's moral duty is? Uh, this one surprised me too. That answer choice 3, by checking whether the majority of society approves or disapproves of the proposed action. No, we do not find out what our moral duties are by looking externally. We don't look at society. We don't look at authorities. Instead, our sole authority is inward, is internal. It's reason alone. And so that is the correct answer here. This is on page 179. Okay. So let's talk then about your readings for this week that hopefully you've already started and begun taking notes. It's the social contract tradition, social contractarianism. That's a mouthful. So this view is one of an approach that's called the proceduralism. So you'll have a question about what that is on your quiz. And this makes it like Kant as well. So for example, Kant's principle of universalizability, that is a procedural ethical rule. Rule consequentialism is proceduralism. So this is the context for social contractarianism. Your definition for it is on page 194. So let me just step through this with you because some of the key terms I've already highlighted for you, and these are ones that are going to work their way through the entire 2 chapters. You can always come back to them as sort of tests of whether or not social contractarianism would view a particular action as morally right or wrong. If you sort of pinpoint the relevance and the how these 3 terms are raised or questioned or made problems in whatever the moral question is or choice or action. Okay, so actions are morally right if they are permitted by rules that free, equal, and rational people would agree to live by. Okay, notice I didn't put punctuation there at the end because it's not over yet. I just wanted to pause and point out that it's setting up a conditional. That hypothetical right there, if actions more like if they are permitted by rules that free, equal, and rational people would agree to live by. Of course, that raises the obvious question. Well, what rules would free, equal, and rational people agree to live by? Well, that's kind of the point of fleshing out the theory. That's exactly what you need to look at. And we're going to talk about that too. Okay, so that's the first part. If you can judge an action as morally right if it is permitted by rules that free, equal, and rational people would agree to live by. But there's an escape clause on the condition that others obey these rules as well. So here's sort of a big point about social contractarianism. It's that morality is a social phenomenon. It's a social matter. If you are on a desert island by yourself, this moral theory has nothing to say about what you do, because for the social contractarian, whatever you do in an isolated situation when you're by yourself, there is no such thing as moral or immoral action. Okay, so social contractarianism is, in this way at least, limited to those actions that we perform, those of our behaviors that are done in a social context where other people are affected, or we are affected by them, or we see them, or they see us, and so on. It's a social phenomenon. Okay, so that's the key thing here, and that's why this condition is important. So on the condition that others obey these rules as well. And so when does the escape clause come into play? That's a really important question, because that gets us to issues of important things like civil disobedience. When is it permissible to break the laws of a society? Okay, when is it morally permissible? Notice there, that isn't even a meaningful question if you take the view that what is morally right is whatever is legally right or permitted. That is not, and so that doesn't work in normative theories. Instead, we look to normative theories. We want those normative theories so that we can refer to what's actually going on, what kind of laws we actually have, and be able to judge them as morally right, or wrong. Are those good laws or are those bad laws? We need some kind of theory. Social contractarianism is a powerful theory for doing that. And one of the things that makes it powerful is that we have this escape clause. Okay, so let's go on and talk about some of the features, some of the key features that you need to really grasp and pay attention to in your reading. So one thing that you see in the definition, just popping back for a second, that we are assuming a society of free, equal, and rational people, right? And so what that does, it assumes that all the actors, all of the individuals in our society are going to be motivated by reason and by self-interest, or rational self-interest. Okay, and this is discussed with a very famous illustration called the prisoner's dilemma. And so one of the things that we want to be able to figure out if we're going to have our rules, our rules of moral conduct governed by the social realities rather than just sort of internal and individual realities, is we need to figure out what people are inclined to do that is always in their rational self-interest. So when you're in a pickle, when you could suffer harm, what is going to be in your rational self-interest? And this prisoner's dilemma is an excellent illustration of how it is so difficult to get to any kind of cooperation rather than competition or self-interest, right? That we are inclined always to act in our self-interest. And prisoner's dilemma shows why it's rational to do so, but, and here's the key, but even though it's rational to act in your self-interest at all times, sometimes that is going to produce worse results. Okay, so that's really, really crucial. So that's what the dilemma is trying to help us see here, is that given that people are going to be motivated by rational self-interest, and given that sometimes by acting on that motivation, we are going to be worse off, how do we then, as a group, as a society, how do we come to some arrangement where we are not worse off? Okay, in other words, how can we learn to cooperate instead of always be competing? Because sometimes when we are just competing for our own interests, we are all, including ourselves, going to be worse off. This is what Prisoner's Dilemma shows. And this is also described by Thomas Hobbes as the state of nature. And this is what we want to get out of. We want to get out of the Prisoner's Dilemma. We want to get out of the state of nature and find cooperative, beneficial rules that are going to lead to more flourishing and less harm. Okay, so this is discussed on pages 197 to 198, State of Nature, and so you'll want to look carefully at that. And then the next topic then is, he gets into the advantages, and there are many, many advantages to contractarianism. I think by my count there were about 9. So there's a lot of stuff in the advantages side for social contractarianism. Okay, so what we get then is, just to sum up before I move on to Veil of Ignorance, is that what moral rules are then under social contractarianism are rules, or special rules for cooperation. Okay, so they allow that we are always going to be seeking our own interests above those of others, and that it is rational to do so, but that excuse me, but that in order to avoid the harms that come from doing that, we are going to set up rules to protect us. Excuse me a second. Okay, I'm back. Hell, that was a Clinton coughing fit there. Man, that was bad. My voice is still not recovered. Tell you what I'm going to do. I'll pop out for just a second before going to the veil of ignorance and seeing if you have any questions for me. I might have lost everybody from that little episode. Oh wow, I'm crying even. Okay, so any questions? I'm going to look in the queue here. And I see no questions. Okay, so I will pop back in and get a tissue and wipe my weeping eyes. And right, so let's finish up for today. Okay. Nope. Sorry. I'm a little unhinged now with the coughing fit. Okay, here we go. All right, so I think I wrapped up about how social contractarianism helps us obtain those special rules of cooperation so that we can pursue our rational self-interest and at the same time not suffer from the effects of situations like the prisoner's dilemma. Okay, I've hammered that. Veil of ignorance. So that's another important concept that is unique to contractarianism. This was developed by the philosopher John Rawls, discussed on page 199 and following. The idea there is that this is a test for how we get those rules of cooperation that will benefit everyone, all the free, equal, and rational individuals, right? And so in order to do that, we got to get ourselves and identify what is it that puts us on an equal footing. And so what we have to do then is strip out all of those particularities of our identity that make us different from one another, and then get down to the sort of things that to put those features of our differences aside, so that we are not showing favoritism for one of those identities. Okay, so in other words, if you take out so we have let's say we have two individuals, A and B. Now what we're going to do is not know, say, the sex of A or B. Is A woman and B a man? Don't know. What we want, though, are rules that apply to A and B equally. Okay, so we don't want to know their sex. Likewise, we don't want to know their ethnicity. We don't want to know their religion. We don't want to know their economic status, and so on. Okay, so now this is not to say that in a free, equal, and rational society that there wouldn't be things like affirmative action, for example, but those come out after a process of seeking to level that playing field for all free, equal, and rational individuals. All right, so those are corrections to social problems. So don't get confused here about what the veil of ignorance is intended to do. It is not intended to be sort of a litmus test for every law that we perform. It is instead to try to figure out what it is that is basic to all of us that will make sure that we prohibit the things that are actually harmful, that might be permitted under, say, a theory of self-interest, and encourage the things that are helpful, right? And so we want to know what those things will be. And so that's why we have to, we seek to be treated equally as we're going to treat others equally. Okay, so the only thing that the veil of ignorance does not erase, the only knowledge that we retain then is, excuse me, this is on page 200, right? So it's just the basic human needs that we have, right? Of that we are that we need food, that we need shelter, and things like that. Okay, because that too is also equal. All right. So I don't need to know that. Um, I don't need to have it stripped away that, oh, wow, I need some basic human, I have to have certain basic human needs and wants met. Of course, right? We don't have to strip out what those things are because we all have those. It's the things that make us different, right? Those are the things that we need the knowledge to be taken away of in order to identify those rules that are going to be fair. Okay. So then, after the discussion of the veil of ignorance, and actually as part of that, then, let me back up just a second. Okay, so the veil of ignorance is intended to set up the ground rules for justice. Okay, so in order to have a just society, the idea of the contractarian is that that is going to be a society of equals. Okay, so that everybody gets what they deserve, everybody gets what they work for, and everybody is going to be cooperative. That's the aim here, is that, so for example, to contrast it with one of our earlier theories, consequentialism, that had a real problem with justice. Well, contractarianism, that's what it prioritizes, is establishing justice. That's why it is a moral theory of social rules. Okay, sorry, let me move on. Sorry, I can feel the voice getting weaker and weaker. Okay, so I told you there were about 9 advantages of contractarianism. So on pages 199 through 204, make sure that you do look at those. There are several, and there will be, of course, a multiple answer question to make sure that you understand those and have a grasp of those. And the one that I think is interesting, of course, is where the moral theory supersedes whatever legal reality there is, and then opens up a space for us to understand the morality of when it's actually right, or it's a moral duty for us to disobey laws. So I think that's a really interesting and important section for you to read. It's the last advantage that's discussed. Okay, so then we go on to chapter 14, which is the problems for social contract tradition, and the number one problem that's raised is the free rider problem. So anytime you talk about cooperation, people are always going to raise this question of, wow, 90% of the society is playing by the rules. While you hear politicians say that all the time, hey, we want to reward the people who play by the rules. Sure. And what that implies is, there are some people who are not. And these people are, as the phrase goes, getting a free ride. So everybody else is chipping in to do the right thing. But then there are just some that just refuse. They will not help out. They are exploiting the goodwill and efforts of everyone else and they don't make any sacrifices themselves. So this is exactly the sort of person that you don't want in the prisoner's dilemma, because you're going to get sold out, right? And they would rather see destruction come to everyone else rather than lose out themselves. Okay, so they would burn the system down rather than feel like they're losing out. And that is then the basis for a lot of unfairness. So the free rider on one reading is sort of the ultimate rational agent, because they're always acting in their self-interest, the ethical egoist, for example. But on the other hand, that creates social chaos, because then, even though for that individual it's highly rational, it, in the situations, in socially complex problems, then we have a situation where if we're all doing that, then we're creating more harm for ourselves and others. So, okay. So look at the free rider problem there in the early part of the problems and disadvantages of contractarian theory. The other big concept, getting here at the end now, is consent. And understand what consent is. It is the two kinds of consent that you need to understand the difference between, are what I would call actual consent. This is like a literal consent. So what is that? Well, if you've ever been to a hospital and you've had to get surgery, or maybe you have a child who had to get surgery, the doctors are going to come and put some forms in front of your face and say, okay, here's the consent form. This is what you need to sign in order for us to do the surgery. And then you have to actually sign it. And the idea there is that you are being informed of what's going to happen. And based on your grasp of that, you are agreeing that you're okay with it, that you consent to what is being proposed. And so that is an example of actual consent, right? Of not tacit consent, but of explicit consent. Okay, so there are other examples of that, like if you are if you're getting naturalized as a citizen, then you go through this process, and one of the big events in your life then is that day that you take the oath to become a citizen. And so what you do there is you are giving your consent, your explicit consent, to become a citizen of the country, and you accept the rules of that. Okay, so you could call that a social contract, but it's a unique kind of social contract, because there you're coming as an outsider to the society and then saying, I join this, I choose to join this. Okay, that's explicit. The really interesting and difficult part of social contracts then comes not in those situations, which are the exceptions, but the typical kinds of situations we're in, the everyday situations where we're giving our tacit consent. And so it has more to do with you remaining silent about what the government is doing. You're not opposing it. You're doing things like just sitting put. You are residing somewhere. And by doing that, you are reaping benefits from the society. So by your actions, you are giving consent. It's not that you've explicitly signed a piece of paper. It is not that you have raised your hand and taken an oath. Those are not tacit consent. Okay? Tacit consent is expressed through silence or not opposing something. Okay? So have a close look at that section. You've got at least 2 questions there on consent, because it's so key to social contract theory. Okay. Yeah, last topic is the scope of the moral community. We always talk about this. With Kant, of course, it was rational agents, and that could be non-human. And then here, the scope of the moral community for contractarians is discussed starting on page 214 for the next couple of pages. And so what you want to do there is look at, who we're trying to answer. So who belongs to this community? Who has rights? Who is one of these rational actors in a free, equal, who is free and equal and rational, right? So for utilitarians, the answer was pretty clear. It's you're a member of the moral community if you can suffer, harm. Kantians, as I just said, is anyone who is rational and autonomous. Contractarians will say this too. It's anyone whose interests are protected by the rules that contractors will agree on. Okay, the free, equal, and rational. Okay, so have a look at that. That's section 2, and understand the difference between self-interest and selfishness, because they are not the same idea. And that is going to be where you focus your attention then for these 2 chapters and prepare for the quiz. So we are done for today. I have a feeling this went longer than I intended. I apologize, but I am ready to field your questions, and let's just pop back and see if we have any questions in the queue or if there are more people here and we have audio. So let me escape. Here we go. Welcome back. Okay, so I'm going to, let me just pop in the showcase. Okay, so yeah, I didn't put anything up today in the showcase, but let me go to the question and answer queue here and see what we have. Okay, so no questions, no typed out questions. So it looks like this is pretty straightforward. I'm going to tune out them. And as I said early in the video, you know, I want to see everyone succeed. So if you are, you know, if you're just not engaged enough with the course, that your, you know, performance on the quizzes is well below the average, then you know what you've got to do. You know, and for those of you who I really want to make sure that you have an opportunity to improve, are those of you who are feeling like you're doing the things that I've told you to do, and then I've given you some guidelines for doing, but it's just not paying off for you. Your performance isn't quite where you want it to be. If that's your situation, that's who I want to talk to. And so if you will just reach out to me, and we can just look over your, you know, specific performance, and I can look and see, you know, if I can pinpoint some specific things to help you with. Be glad to do that, and want to encourage you to do that sooner rather than later. So, right. Well, good luck on the contractarian readings, and prepare well for the quiz. You have an hour for this one, so we're back to our normal kind of quiz. And again, be in touch if there's anything I can help you with, and I'll see you later.